So, hi friends, good afternoon. Today, we will see the introduction of SQL. Uh, Before going to talk about the SQL, we will talk very basic things. That is like it. So, we will see the first. We will see the data. So, what is the data? What is data? Data is a collection of information. Collection of information. We can call it as data. So, so whatever the information, we can call it as data. For suppose, if you take student information, for suppose if you take a student information, if you want to know the student information, we can call it as a student. We can call it as a data. So student information is nothing but about the is rule number, is rule number and uh, school name. So these are all the we can call it as a data. So whatever if you take the banking sector, you take the banking sector or retail sector, they will maintain the data, their information in their website or server. So these are all the we can call it as a data. Data. So data will be stored. Data will data will data will be stored in the database. Stored in the database. Stored in the database in the form of in the form of in the form of in the form of tables. In the form of tables. Yeah. So So what is table? What is table? Table is nothing but collection of table is nothing but collection of rows and columns. Collection of rows and columns can call it as table. Collection of rows and collection of rows and columns can call it as table. So for suppose if you take for suppose if you take for suppose if you take student information, take suppose student has a student ID and a student name, school school name, location, location. This is the table we have. For suppose student one name, student ID is one, and student name is you can take Rakesh. Location is Hyderabad. So another person ID is two. Another person ID is two. His name is Ramesh. His name is Ramesh. So he's from Bangalore. So here you can see table is a collection of rows and columns. So here you see right this line we can call it as rows. This line we can call it as rows, and this line mm, vertical we can call it as vertical. So vertical we can call it as vertical we can call it as column. Horizontally we can call it as rows. So table is nothing but collection of rows and columns. Collection of rows and columns. This is about the table. This is about the table. Types of database. Types of databases. Types of databases. One is relational database. One is relational database. Relational database. Another one is no SQL or no relational database. No SQL database. So what is a relational database? Relational database is nothing but we can store the data in the form of we can store the data in the form of rows and columns. We can store the we can store the data in the form of rows and we can store the data in the form of rows and column. There is a the tables have relation between the tables have relation between them. So in relational database is nothing but tables have the relation between another table. So we can call it as a relational relational databases. In NoSQL, we can store the rows and data can be data can be stored data can be stored rows and rows and rows and columns, and tables have relations between another table. The tables have relation between between another table. Relation between the another table. Nothing but relational database. And no SQL or relation no relation database. And no SQL or no SQL or no SQL or no relation database. There is no relation between no SQL database. No SQL database. There is no relation between there is no relation between tables. There is no relation between there is no relation between tables. And there is in relational database there is no relational database in a no SQL database. We can't store the data in the form of rows and columns. We can't store the data in the form of we can't store the data in the form of in the form of rows and rows and columns. So example of relational database. Examples of relational database. One is SQL MySQL, one is SQL server, one is SQL server. Another one is another one is MySQL, and third one PostSQL, PostSQL, so on. In no relation database and non-relation database. In non-relational database, non-relation database, non-relational database is the example is non-relational database. Non-relational database example is one is one is HBase, one is HBase. Another one is MongoDB, MongoDB, MongoDB. Third one. So these are the example of no non-relational database. So now we can't touch any data any servers in relation database. We can't do anything in the no relation database. We can use the relation databases, that is relation database servers only, that is SQL server, MySQL server. We can interact with these SQL servers only. So mostly we will use the SQL server management studio. We'll use the SQL server SQL server server SQL server SQL server management studio management studio. So SQL server. So if you know the all the queries in if you know the all the queries in SQL server management, we can write the all the queries in MySQL also, PostSQL also. So there is a little different is there, but if you know the all the queries in SQL server, we can write the queries in MySQL also. There is a slight little different is there. Syntax is different, little. So 90% is same, but there is a slight different is there. So this will say we can write the queries in SQL. We can use the SQL Server Management Studio. We can use this server. What is SQL? SQL means SQL stands for structured. So SQL stands for structured query language. Before they used to call SQL. So now they're calling SQL. SQL stands for structured query language. Structure means it will be interact with the rows and columns. It will interact with the rows and columns. So it is store the data and manipulate the data. Manipulate means so whatever the data is exist in the data. If you want to like if you want to retrieve the data, SQL we can use the SQL query language. So SQL query language interact with the user and database. So it will store the data and it will retrieve the data from database. So what are the jobs? Available if you learn the SQL? So we can become like a data analyst, business analyst.